Chapter 3 of Tractate Eruvin discusses the laws of the Techum and the Eruv, so some background first. A Techum means boundary, and it's the law that you may not go further than 2,000 cubits from your place of dwelling on Shabbos. That's the rule. What you can do, if you need to travel further than that, is to shift the definition of your place of residence by creating an Eruvin Techumin, which will redefine, temporarily, your place of residence. It would need to include both where you're staying and where you're going to within its boundaries. You can establish an Eruvin Techumin by either staying in that middle location until Shabbos starts, or by leaving an amount of food there prior to Shabbos' start. Both of these symbolically make that location your new place of residence, and you can now travel between your shifted boundaries. The first Mishnah states, you may make an Eruv Techumin, or a Shetufei Meva'is, which is another concept for later, using all types of food, besides for water and salt. The foods can be purchased using Ma'aser Sheni tithe funds. Also, in general, a person who vowed to abstain from eating nourishing foods is still allowed to eat water and salt. You can use wine to make this Eruv for a Nazir who has taken an oath against wine, or for a Yisrael with Teruma, which he can't eat. Others say you can't use Teruma food. You can put the Eruv for a Kohen in a plowed-over courtyard, which a Kohen can't normally enter. Some say you can even put it between graves, because the Kohen can technically make a partition between the graves and eat his Teruma. The Gemara says that based on a specific phrasing from the Mishnah, it references the fact that women are exempt from all positive time-bound mitzvahs, as learned later in Tractate Kedushin. This is a general rule. However, in spite of that status, there are exceptions. This applies even if the general rule says except, listing specific exceptions. You can't assume that no other exceptions exist. This rule applies also by some laws of impurity, and also here, where we said you can make an Eruv out of any food besides for water and salt. Unsaid, however, but also still not allowed, are using truffles or mushrooms. Some say water and salt combined can be used for an Eruv. Some say that water and salt combined can be purchased with Ma'aser funds, and definitely also used for an Eruv, but not vice versa. This was argued on elsewhere. It also discusses purchasing water and salt with Ma'aser money included with oil. We bring many sources and they're argued over. There's also a source which says you can purchase fish with Ma'aser funds, and that source is also argued over. We bring the source that fish aren't considered nourishment from the ground, and there's a disagreement by birds. Okay, some other foods you can make an Eruv with. A specific type of herb called papuin, purslane, and coriander, but it says that you can't use green unripe grain or unripe dates, which aren't usually eaten. Some say coriander is only allowed if it's not fully ripened and it's unhardened, and only if you have many children who can eat coriander. Some say you don't actually need to have the children. Some allow only median coriander. One sage, Rav, began allowing green grain after he came to Babylonia and saw people eating it, but specifically in reference to the garden variety. It also discusses the proper blessings for these based on how they grow, which we say is the vegetable blessing, Borei Peri Ha'adama. We also discussed whether you can use unripe dates. We said no, but maybe that doesn't include some specific species. We say that they actually can be counted as food in regards to the laws of impurity, as you can technically cook them, but not by an Eruv, which requires immediately edible food. This and a number of other specific vegetables are discussed. Some say you can use a handful of moist beans, some say you can use raw beets, and we discuss their health benefits. It also discusses the amount of apples necessary. Some say it's a kav, which is an old form of measurement, somewhere between 1.5 and 2.6 quarts. Other fruits require less. There are other specific foods discussed onwards, like different parts of an onion. The amounts of beer are discussed. Some say it's 2/4 of a kav, based on sources. Some say an amount smaller than 2 lugin, which is a different form of measurement. For dates, it's discussed. Some say a kav, some say more. A few other specific food measurements are listed. It also says an opinion that something eaten with bread, you can use it if there's enough to eat it with bread for 2 meals, and something not eaten with bread, you can use it if there's enough to eat 2 meals with it. There's a discussion what types of meat qualifies as which of these. There are other discussions. Some say you can use raw meat. One said you can use raw eggs. Some say with 1 egg, some say with 2. There's also discussion on which types of foods are considered to provide sustenance. There's debate on these subjects. We said we can make an Eruv with wine even for a Nazir, and with Teruma for a Yisrael, and others disagree. They would say you could make an Eruv on the eve of Yom Kippur, even though you can't eat, as that was edible while it was still day, unlike by the wine and Teruma, which can't be eaten at all. Some said it's not even enough to put food there, you also have to have your bed and utensils there. Some say you have to wear the same type of clothing, the same color, when you carry on Shabbos as the clothes you wore when you made the Eruv. and some require you to put your clothes you plan on wearing at the location you made the Eruv. Some require the Eruv to be made with non-sacred food, but allow the wine for a Nazir, as he could technically annul his vow, unlike by consecrated food, possibly because it becomes tevel, which can't be eaten by anybody. But we say it's because he holds like the opinion that anything prohibited on Shabbos by a rabbinical law is forbidden during twilight, right as Shabbos starts, and that's when the Eruv takes effect and activates, so this wouldn't work with Teruma. We bring sources. A source says that for the second elderly, you can use a smaller amount of food, but for a gluttonous individual, you can use the normal amount of food, as that's an abnormality that would result in a stringency. We said you could make the Eruv in a plowed-over graveyard for a Kohen, which he can't enter, as he technically could actually enter, as he could blow the dirt away to see if there's any concealed bone fragments. Some allow a Kohen to walk in such a graveyard if many people have trampled through it, as that would remove the bone fragments. We said that there's an opinion that we can put the Eruv in a cemetery for a Kohen, as he can technically create a partition. The types of partitions are discussed, such as going in an enclosed carriage or similar. This also refers to food that cannot become impure if placed on a grave. The Kohen can, in theory, eat this food while avoiding the graveyard from his enclosure by grabbing it with a flat wooden utensil which is non-susceptible to impurity, and the whole exact method is discussed. Some disallow all of this as the gravesite is rendering a personal non-mitzvah related benefit, and people require it to be made to facilitate the performance of a mitzvah. New Mishnah, you can make an Eruv using demai, which is questionably tithed produce, with ma'aser rishon that's had truma taken from it, or ma'aser sheni, tithes, or consecrated produce that was redeemed. Even Kohanim can make an Eruv with challah. You cannot make an Eruv with tevel, which is untithed produce, or ma'aser rishon without truma taken, and not with ma'aser sheni or consecrated produce that were not redeemed. The Gemara says that demai is allowed, as if he wants, he can theoretically renounce all of his property and become a pauper, and then he'll be allowed to eat questionably tithed produce, which can be eaten by poor people. Some say that they can't, but we hold that they can. The qualifications of these different types of tithing are discussed, and their sources. New Mishnah, the Eruv needs to be placed down with the proper intents, but it can be done by an agent. It can't be done by an agent who won't have proper intents. So you can't give your Eruv to be set up by a deaf-mute, a deranged person, or a minor, or somebody who doesn't follow the laws of the Eruv. It is permitted if they're going to be giving it to a qualified individual who will set up the Eruv. The Gemara asks that some allow a minor, but we say that's only by an Eruv Chatzeres, which is different than what we're discussing, which is an Eruv Techumen. The latter case of handing off the Eruv works because we hold elsewhere that there's a presumption that an agent performs his task. We bring sources. This, and further points on tithing, are discussed further. After some further points on this, there's a new Mishnah. If you put the Eruv on a tree over 10 handbreadths from the ground, it's not a valid Eruv. If it's below 10 handbreadths, it works. If you put it in a pit, no matter how deep, it works, as it's accessible. The Gemara says that the case is where the tree is in a public domain, and you intended your residence to be established on the ground beneath. So if it's under 10 handbreadths, it's allowed, as this holds like the opinion that something forbidden rabbinically is not forbidden during twilight. We bring proofs, and some say this only applies to a tree outside the outskirts of a city, but if it's within the outskirts of a city, it's allowed even if it's over 10 handbreadths, as the entire city is considered a private domain above 10 handbreadths, and the tree would be included. Some even allow it outside the outskirts of a city, as this opinion holds that establishing an Eruv also creates a 4-cubit private boundary around it, which extends infinitely upwards. We give some definitions as to what above or below 10 handbreadths means, and this is discussed further. There are further discussions on similar points. We try to bring some proofs from similar cases by a closet and its accessibility. The case of the pit we're discussing is where it's in a Carmelist neutral area, and he wants to establish his residence above the pit, so it's rabbinically prohibited, but it works, as this is the opinion that holds that something rabbinically prohibited is not prohibited by twilight, which would allow this Eruv to function. New Mishnah, if the Eruv was placed on top of a reed or a pole, as long as the reed was uprooted and then stuck in the ground, it works, even if it's 100 cubits high. The Gemara says that the opinion that doesn't allow a non-uprooted reed is like the opinion that says a rabbinically prohibited action is not allowed at twilight, so you wouldn't be able to remove the reed. There is differentiation with the types of reeds used, such as no using hard ones, as they're considered to be like trees, and similar points. New Mishnah, if you put the Eruv in a locked closet and lost the key, it's a valid Eruv. Rabbi Eliezer says that if he does not know that the key is in its place, it's not a valid Eruv. The Gemara explains that the case is where it's a closet made out of bricks that can be disassembled as they weren't cemented together. There are further qualifications. Some say it's made out of wood and it's a utensil, so it can be demolished on Shabbos, and others hold it's the structure. So there are many similar points. These and their correlations to laws of impurity are discussed. New Mishnah, if the Eruv rolled beyond the Techum, or rubble fell on it, or it burned, or it was truma which became impure, it's no longer a valid Eruv. If this occurred after dark and Shabbos had already started, it's fine. Others say that the Techum's center shifts in between his current location and the Eruv. Some people say that a doubtful Eruv is valid. The Gemara says an opinion that if the Eruv rolled beyond the Techum but stays within 4 cubits of the border, it's valid. The case with the rubble falling, you could make it work like every opinion by saying that the rubble here needs to be removed with a hoe and pick, which is biblically prohibited. We need both of these cases to show that it's invalid even if it's near you, and even if you think that a wind can blow it back in. We need to teach that it's invalid if it burned before nightfall, and if it was teruma that became impure, to inform you of lenient and stringent opinions on this. Those stringent opinions are discussed, ruling strictly by a doubtful Eruv, as this opinion holds that these laws are biblical. This is discussed. The opinions are spoken about further, along with the lenient opinion who holds that it's a rabbinical precept, and what they rule by some laws of purity. There are similar cases. It brings up a case, what if somebody vows that their loaf of bread should be unconsecrated on Friday and consecrated on Shabbos, and then uses it as an Eruv? People rule it to be a valid Eruv. If he did the inverse, vowing his loaf to be consecrated, and then on Shabbos it should be unconsecrated, and then uses it as an Eruv, it's not valid. The reason is because it's a doubt during twilight, so it goes according to its current status, disallowing it if it was forbidden prior to twilight. There are similar cases brought. New Mishnah, discussing making a conditional Eruv. Let's say somebody wants to avoid somebody on Shabbos. The example is brought of a tax collector. So you're allowed to establish 2 Eruvs, one to the east and one to the west, and say that your Eruv is the one in whichever direction you need to go if the tax collectors come from the other direction. You can make it conditional that you can pick which one to use if they come from both directions, or that neither will activate if they don't come at all. Or if there's a big scholar coming to town, you can say that your east Eruv works if he's in the east, or west if he's in the west. If 2 scholars come from either direction, you can activate either one. If neither come, then neither activate. A different sage adds that if 2 scholars visit, you should visit the one that's your teacher, and if they're both your teachers, then you should visit whichever one you want. There are similar cases mentioned in the Gemara of a town official you want to meet, of different kinds of scholars, and similar. These are all discussed. It goes on about this and some points on temple sacrifices and their designation for a bit. This and the concept of berera, choice by temple sacrifices, are discussed. New Mishnah, if a holiday falls out right by a Shabbos, either just before or just after, you can establish 2 Eruvs, with the condition to have either one active on Shabbos and the other one active on the holiday. Others say that the holiday and Shabbos are considered to be one consecutive period, so you can only establish 1 Eruv across the entire period. What he should do, according to that opinion, if you want to maintain an Eruv for 2 days, is to bring your food to that location, wait until Shabbos starts, this activates your Eruv, and then leave with the food. On the second day, you should bring the food back and do the same thing, and then you can eat it if you want, and it works. But if you eat it after the first day, that won't work for the second day. The other sage of the first opinion argued with that logic, saying that that's just saying that it's 2 separate days, which you just said it wasn't. The Gemara discusses these cases along with points on the disagreement. We cite many opinions to try to figure out who's correct. There are more points, such as an opinion that the Eruv food must be fit for consumption the day before, which is argued on a bit. There's further discussion on a number of similar topics. New Mishnah. One opinion says that if, by the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, there is concern that the prior month of Elul will be extended, making Rosh Hashanah 2 days long, you can make 2 Eruvs, a different one for each day. Others disagree, saying it's just 1 period. The first opinion also holds that they're considered separate days by some laws of tithes, or for instance, the law that if an egg is laid on the first day, it can't be eaten on the holiday it's laid on, but according to this, you could eat it on the second day, as that day is considered separated. Again, the other opinions disagree. One opinion says that on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, you also say a blessing during prayer for Rosh Chodesh, the first day of the month, and you also say it on the second day. Others disagree. The Gemara discusses this disagreement for a bit. The individual cases and some others based on the logics are debated, such as a deer captured on the first day of a holiday by others and eating its meat on the next day. It also says that some allowed using an item that was brought inside the Techum by a non-Jew if it was brought inside for somebody else. This occurred with somebody bringing in turnips to sell, but it was disallowed as then they began bringing in turnips specifically to sell to the Jewish residents, which can't be used on Shabbos. There are similar incidents listed, and the points on prayer are discussed. It discusses if we say the Rosh Chodesh prayer by the additional Musaf prayer on Rosh Hashanah. It's debated. It also discusses if we say the Shehechiyanu blessing, or even on Yom Kippur, and then not drink the wine, because it's a fast day. We say we do it on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur, and you don't need to drink wine. There are further points on fasting discussed, about fasting on Friday, if you should complete it and fast on Shabbos, which isn't allowed. It's a disagreement. Some allow doing so on minor holidays like Hanukkah and Purim. The different opinions are discussed a bit, but it's ruled that you can complete a fast on Friday. And that's the end of Chapter 3.